Welcome to the Laurent Collective podcast, where we go deeper than just surface talk.
Each week, we'll explore everything from family, business, creativity, culture, and faith.
To make sure not to miss an episode, be sure to subscribe and hop on to Instagram at Laurent Collective to chat with us about this episode.
Making new friends is really hard, especially when you've moved to a new place and left really close friends behind. And so, on the episode today, we thought we would talk about our own experience of what that has been like and some things that just we have found helpful in building new friendships and how you just hold on to those old ones, but also you start to build some new ones in your new place. Today, I feel like I always start saying that. Today. Yeah. But there may be some of you who have moved or are planning to move or are finding your place maybe a year or two into a new location. And you are trying to figure out what it means to have friends and what we would refer to as extended family, like having family around you. Especially if you've picked up and moved from a place that maybe you really had deep roots there. And we've really been processing this a lot as we have made decisions to stay in London, to renew our visa and things like that. And we just thought we'd share a little bit of what that process has looked like and what we've been talking about and what we've been through here and what that looks like of creating new friendships. I mean, literally from fresh start, brand new. Yeah. No background whatsoever. And when I think about this, I have this picture that will stick with me forever. And that is when we left left the States for the first time. Yeah. We had friends, we had one of our mentors, and we had two, I guess we had three close friends that came to the airport. And in the airport that we were in, when you walk through security and then you're going into where you will actually, the departures are and everything, there's this big glass window area that the people can stand there and wave to you when you get to that part. And they were all, I'm going to try not to get choked up. Yikes, I wasn't expecting that. They were all standing there. Oof, I am getting choked up. They were all standing there like waving at our family as we were leaving. And yeah, I remember thinking like, will we ever find friends like that again? Because they are some of our like closest friends. And then
I would say no.
No, we won't because we can't replace them, and they aren't. We are still so close with them.
Yeah.
It looks very different because we're not doing like day-to-day life really close in the same place. We're in a different country, all that stuff. But they will always be considered our best friends,
and they won't be replaced.
No, exactly. But I do remember that panic attack. Like, oh my gosh, what have we just done? Like, this is not only gut-wrenching to move far away from them, but like, will we ever have that again? And like Pat said, we are not saying we're replacing them because that's those of you that know who you are. That is not the case whatsoever. We wish if we could have our dream. We wish that we could take you guys and you could just move here. That would be great. Find some availability on our street.
I think everything is solved. I think you should just do it.
I see why not.
So we'll contact you and let you know.
Yeah, we'll be talking to you guys about that. I think we already say that to you very often. So, but in that, having that, and then plopping yourself down in a city, and this would be pretty much. I mean, it's going to be different where you where you leave compared to where you live, because cultures are going to be different. Even within like if you are in the States and listening, or you're in the UK and you move from like London to Cornwall, the cultures there are going to be different. If you are moving from Indiana to New York City, or vice versa, turning around the other way, cultures are different. And so we thought we would just talk about like,
our experience
and what we have found. We will say that this is still an area that we, in many times, feel very lonely still. But there are some things that we have learned, and that as we talk about a couple times, wherever you are on what you believe in your faith and stuff like that too, we have like seen how God has placed people in our lives here in London, that maybe were not exactly what we were thinking was going to be our typical friendship. And then it's grown so much that they're some of our closest friends. And
it's awesome.
It's made us think outside the box too. So,
yep.
Yeah. And this isn't like a 5 tips for making friends in a new place. This is not what this is.
No. I think it's just, it's like, when you move away from, whether that's really deep rooted friendships or even like family that lives really close, like what does it look like, or how could you maybe potentially put yourself out there to create relationships that kind of feel like that, that create that next step in these new deep rooted relationships? And how do you do that? And, or at least how we're trying to do that,
Yes.
If our experience can help you in any way, that's what we want to do. So.
I mean, if it gives you any idea, like we have been here 5 years and this is still a process. I don't know. Well, yeah, it might going away. That's not the right phrase, but it will grow. And I think the one thing that we have often come back to when we think of those friends that we're seeing at the window and that have been, and there were a couple others that weren't able to make it that day. But when I think of those friendships, like they didn't just happen overnight. It's weird when you look back, you think like, oh yeah, like that, we were just instant friends and stuff like that. But sure, we may have been like instant friends on a surface level. Yeah. But like it wasn't deep. And then you also have to think back too, on different stages of your life, friendships happen in different ways. And so
yeah, for sure.
When I think about us being in university, like friendships grow in a different way because you have a lot of time. You have a lot of time to just hang out and to just be and things
Sometimes
like that.
You live next to people
exactly.
that you never would have
thought
of.
Room, or in the same house. And like friendships are different in different seasons of life. So depending when you are listening to this and what season you are in, and even for us too, friendships looked different before we had kids. Once you have kids, they come with you or you have to find a babysitter. That makes things different. It just changes the dynamics and stuff, or you're tired and, that kind of thing. Yeah. And so different seasons look different. So recognizing that we're going to talk from our current season, obviously, but I can remember those. But I think it's super important when you move to a new place to actually think back and realize that like those deeper friendships that you have had and that you're leaving in that place, they're not going away. It did take time.
Yeah, they're deep for a reason.
Exactly.
They're deep because there are things that you went through with those people over years. Yes, you can go deep with somebody relatively fast in some ways, but typically those types of relationships take years and years and years to really take root and to really get to certain places that mean something so special and so amazing, And so I think, that kind of stuff just takes time. It just takes time. And it's really easy when you jump into a new place and you move to a new place or whatever it is. And you're like, okay, that person, we're going to go that deep right away. That's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So being reminded that those relationships that you're leaving or potentially leaving in some ways took time to get there. So just to remember that.
It's the long haul, right?
Yeah.
It's not, I think it's so easy. And I sometimes still feel this way after 5 years. I'm like, oh, I just want the type of friend and fill in the blank, that is whatever the desire that I have in that. And I think it's such a reminder again, like especially when you move to a new place, you're just craving that. Like you feel isolated, you feel lonely.
Yeah.
You really want that kind of friendship or friends. You want that friends group that just feels easy and it's not a lot of work and things like that. You don't have to clean your house for when they come over, things like that it's just easy. But it's a reminder that it takes time. That doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
And it's part of the moving thing. That's the hardest thing about moving.
Yeah.
I think we often can think of it like if you ever moved when you were a child and stuff like that, you can remember what that feels like. I think we often discredit that as adults of like how hard you moved a lot when you were a child, but I only moved like schools once because we moved house. And I remember how gut-wrenching it was to not be with the same kids I had been with since kindergarten, and that kind of thing. And like we packed up our kids and moved them to a different country. And what that was like for they were all different ages, but what that was like for their friendships, but then realizing like as adults, that's the same for us. Like, we're doing this again, and there's a lot of weird stuff that goes on in your mind with that too. Of like, well, I'm not going to have friends like that again. That's just, So there's this weird, and especially when we move to a place where a lot of people feel that exact same way.
That's
where
so
they
true.
have moved from their country or from away from their families and stuff like that, and they're living, they have to get on an airplane to see their family and their friends that they had those deep roots with. That it's interesting because you would think that means people gravitate towards people really quickly,
Right.
but I think because we're dealing with so many cultures, that it tends to be everyone's just trying to feel each other out, and like, I'm not sure exactly what's appropriate here, and what's you feel this weird, I don't know, it kind of creates a weird dynamic a little bit.
And I'm gonna say this, and there's definitely exceptions to the rule, but here for us specifically in London, it's really in and out for a lot of people, where they come for a certain season and then they move again. So even trying to potentially think about putting deep roots or deep, building a deep relationship with someone could potentially switch really, really fast. And so some people
Mm-hmm.
would tend to then say, well, that person's probably going to leave soon, so might not necessarily step further into a relationship with them. Or
I've heard people literally say that. They have said, I tend to have a lot of friends, but I don't get really close because it's just so hurtful when they leave.
That's so hard.
That's so hard. But I think what we have realized is what you miss out on if you do that. Because while we did have some friends that we only knew them for 2 years and then they did move on and have left and gone, I mean, they are and they will be, again, they are now part of that group of people that we consider such close friends, that they are the fabric of our lives now.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh gosh, that sounded like super cheesy. Fabric of our lives. But it's true. Like,
woven together.
Exactly. Stop it now. Don't keep going with it. Oh, now I'm going to start thinking of all kinds of things. So don't discredit that. While we just said, yes, it does take time. Sometimes you do have a unique situation where you get really close with people because of your situations or dynamics that you're in or things like that. It just sometimes does click faster. So I'm thinking of a couple people in particular that, I mean, it's not the same. Again, we're not in the same place. It's not as easy to go to dinner or have them to our house and stuff, but like, we can get on a Zoom with them and it feels like we've picked back right up where we left off, or when we do see them next in person and that kind of thing, it will have that feel. So even if you are in a place, because I know there are a lot of cities around the world that are like that are more, somebody comes specifically
transient
for,
is what they would
yeah,
say.
exactly.
Transient.
Like someone comes for a specific job for a certain time and they're there for 2 or 5 years and they're gone. That kind of, and that's hard. It is hard. But it does not mean that you should keep a distance from people and that kind of thing to prevent that being hard, because, I mean, gosh, if we had done that in any time of our lives, we would be very lonely. So,
I mean, I'm not to say that I haven't done it, because I have.
Well, no,
like,
right.
I've gotten discouraged with relationships, and I'm just like, whatever. Like, I'm not going to put that effort into it then, So, I'm not going to say that, I haven't ever done that. I have. I totally have.
We had an interesting...
It's so hard.
We had an interesting thing happen to us when we decided after, because, people would ask us, well, how are you here? And that kind of thing, because, obviously you have to have visas and things like that. And we would say, oh, well, we have a 2-year visa. And feel like, oh, okay. And then when we made the decision and we came back and said, we're on a different visa, we're, committed to staying and stuff like that. For a large, I was actually kind of surprised. For a large group of people, they suddenly were like, oh, that's awesome. And then suddenly something changed in the relationship. Like, it was like they realized we were actually staying for longer.
Yeah.
And that just changed a dynamic that I didn't realize was there before. That maybe was a bit of like what we're talking about, a bit of that like standoffish. Like, I don't want to pursue this because they're only here for 2 years.
Yeah, exactly.
That there was some kind of like hidden barrier up because of that. So that was even, and I thought, oh gosh, like you were just saying, I thought, have I done that to people too? When they've said, like, we're only here. I know I have.
Yeah.
When they say we're only here for this long, or, our visa's this long, or something like that, sometimes I do find myself thinking, Brexit was huge too, thinking through all the people that they were like, I'm not sure if we're staying or not, and things like that. Exactly. Like, and in the back of my head, I'm sure I thought, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't invite them to dinner because I don't want to get too close to them and then they leave. So, you have to somehow find a way to put that aside, or you're missing out on some really awesome opportunities to have friendships.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the one thing we have found is you just have to put yourself out there. And I'm going to compare it to dating because it feels like that sometimes. Not because you're like, I mean, you don't say to somebody, want to be my friend? I mean, I guess sometimes you could, but that's kind of weird as an adult to say that. But you do have to, sometimes you have to be the person to go first to say like, you want to grab coffee, you want to go to it'd be like, you want to go grab a beer at the pub, or, if you have kids, an easy one with kids can be like, hey, let's have a play date. And then depending on your kid's age, typically then that involves some kind of interaction with the parents and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I found myself a lot for a while, and I've gone through seasons of this, just waiting for people to come to me. And that is not always the case. It just doesn't happen in general. And it doesn't mean sometimes somebody's like, oh, I was thinking the same thing, but like sometimes it just takes you taking the initiative.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest thing, or one of the bigger things that we've learned here is we are the ones that are going to have to take the first step in a lot of ways.
And sometimes you get lucky and someone does it before you do.
It's very
Love
true.
when that happens.
Yeah.
But like if I feel, if I have a feeling like, oh, I feel like I get along with this person and stuff. If I think that and I don't ever act on it, and I just sit and wait for them to do that, and then you can often go down. It's so hard. Like when you are in a new place of, they seem, especially if you start to be with somebody a little bit more, they seem to have their group of friends. They seem to be good. Like they don't need another friend or that kind of thing. Or I don't want to ask them to do something because they probably already have plans. Like you go down this whole, you've stopped yourself before you've even initiated.
What do we always say? Like you
talk yourself out of it.
Well, you talk yourself out of it, but then you create a story in your head. That's
exactly.
like not even
That's Brene
true.
Brown who always says that.
Yeah, like
story
it's
in your
not
head.
even true.
Or they haven't texted me. I had this happen with a friend recently. They haven't texted me back. I guess they don't want to do anything with us and stuff like that. And then, she shared with me, like, I hate texting. I'm so bad at texting. I'm sorry. Like, I'm sad because we missed out on an opportunity with you last week because I didn't text you back,
Right.
And in my head, I was like, like something happened.
Yeah.
They don't want to hang out with us. Kind of thing. That wasn't the case at all.
Yeah.
And that's so, we all, again, I'm sorry that I keep going back to this, but like we all, again, go back to that kid who changed schools or moved and stuff and is trying to make new friends, and what that felt like, it's still in us as adults, of overlooking at things and being self-conscious about it or that kind of thing.
Definitely.
Because we just want to have friends.
Yeah.
Right.
So put yourself out there.
Yeah, I think that's one thing we've learned.
Make the first step in some ways.
Again, it feels like dating. Take the first step.
Yeah.
And I think, an easy thing we have found too is like finding people with common interest.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to go thinking on this subject.
Sorry, okay.
No, thinking on this subject of like finding common interests. Like I'm going to take it back to your school analogy, right? Like you're changing schools.
Oh, we're totally going with this, aren't we? We're rolling with it.
This illustration of that.
It's the thread keeping things together.
So for me growing up, right? So I would move. There was a season where my brother and I were in a different school, like for 3 years in a row.
And different state too, right?
In different states. And so again, this idea of common interest for us growing up, right? It was my brother and I played tons of sports, and so that was the way for us to make new friends. And so I'm, again, thinking like this school analogy of moving schools or whatever, stepping into these things that you're interested in, that then others are going to be interested in, like a sport or something like that. Then you start creating bonds and having conversations with people because they have that similar interest too. So yeah, stepping into similar interests of people. So.
And we observed our children when we moved here, and like they were able to make friends much quicker than we were, with the exception of our oldest. So again, that can be, personality wise for your children, and like the type of things that they do like and what kids typically like at that age and stuff like that. And so we had varying degrees of how that happened. But like for our oldest son, for instance, the first 2 years here for him were extremely rough because he
really hard,
was, number one, he had created this cool group of friends in the States that he had been in school with for a couple of years. And there were these like 2 or 3 other boys. And they all were just, sometimes there gets a group of kids together and they're all just wired just exactly alike. And they just clicked. And it was no effort whatsoever for those boys. It just was smooth ride. Like, they got along. Sure, they might have fought about something here and there, but it was not a big deal. And then Zane was thrown into a different culture, a schooling system he didn't understand, and then a group of kids that had been together for a really long time, that he was now the new kid. And not only the new kid, but the new kid with a strange accent and doesn't understand everything.
And all he wanted to do was fit in. And so he was just going after this group of friends that, it's not that they were bad kids, he didn't have common interest as them. I mean, there were some, but not a lot. Again, he wasn't, and we kept saying I think maybe, he was trying to
be something he wasn't.
Yeah, either. That was the more of the thing that, he recognized as we continued to walk with him in it, is like, he realized that he was trying to be a type of person that he wasn't. And I think as he realized that, that's when some other friendships started to shake out and to pop up, because it was like, oh, well, actually, this friend right here, he actually gets me because he's interested in that thing that I'm interested in. And so they start to create these common things that they can relate on, which then creates conversation and things like that. So yeah, and now he's in this group of friends that feels very much like we were when we were in the States. That he found his
they
people.
Are all and again, I think watching his example, that took him 2.5 to 3 years, and that's a long time, especially for when you're in those
I would even say potentially even up to this past year, maybe
something clicked more this year. That's for sure.
It's definitely, he's honing in on his crew in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. And again, you seeing that, and where you think, oh, well, it should be easier for kids. I mean, he was 9 when we moved here. That's not the most fun age to try and figure that stuff out, but it's example again of it takes time finding common interest. And it also, I mean, this is horrible to say, but sometimes you do start to kind of get to know somebody and you realize actually this is maybe not a right fit. Yeah. Again, it sounds weird, but sometimes that happens, and that's okay. You can't force anything. And that's really key, I think, to be sometimes you just don't click with the other people, and that's okay. You only have so much time and you only have so much bandwidth for building friendships.
Exactly.
And if that is the case, it's okay. It doesn't mean you're being rude or things like that. And sometimes they feel it too. And so it's not even, you don't have to force things and that kind of thing. But often it is just so putting yourself out there, finding that common interest. And, for us, that has looked like, obviously an easy win is that we're parents. And so if our kids are playing, there's a common interest right there. That kind of stuff. Sometimes we've realized that, especially at the school, often we will just naturally, and people will gravitate towards us and we gravitate towards them that are expats that are living here from a different country. It doesn't have to be the United States.
Yep.
It can be from all over the world, but there's something about that they've had that experience.
Right.
And they know what it's like to leave their culture and live in this culture. That there's an instant bond that's created, that you can even just crack jokes about and stuff like that then that gets into deeper things, and you start to build a friendship of just that common thing of we've had this experience too, even if we're coming from different places. Doesn't matter. For us, there's sometimes other communities that you're in that, for us, church has been one of those places that we're in that community, and so there's that common interest there, and then that has sparked different things, different friendships and stuff like that too. So, I mean, that's just 2 examples, but just think of, it could be, obviously we're business owner. I mean, that has been actually, we're business owners and creatives and stuff. And so we've been in that circle since we've moved here, and that's sparked some friendships. So yeah, I think it's just, again, thinking through what are the common interests. And sometimes, I know I have a friend here that, sometimes when places you move, there are I mean, again, we'll keep going back to the school thing. It is kind of like school. There are clubs you can join, or groups, or what I think, I can't remember the name of the app or website. I'll think of it, but there's a thing that you can Google common interests, and then within a city they meet up and they do those things. They might be hiking or something like that. It's going to drive me crazy. I want to say it's meetups, but it might be something different. you guys will probably know what it is, but things like that you can find common interests and do that. I know we have a friend in the States that like she has a dog and like she goes to dog parks, and she has met tons of friends that way because there's a common interest of you having dogs in the dog park and that kind of thing. So it just, one of our friends here, like I met her because she was swinging her child next to our daughter. And then we started up a conversation and exchanged phone numbers and stuff like that. So don't ever discredit like that kind of stuff because it really can be helpful in that. And I think we have found, and this will look different for everybody, I often have thought our friends and our good friends need to be the same age as us, around the same age as us, like a 4 or 5 year window, right? And since we've moved here, well, it's not even since we moved here.
Yeah,
this was going on in the States, but I think we were like, oh, like we didn't think about it ever.
Yeah, no.
But then when we moved here, because we had the mindset of like, we need to have somebody in our same life stage, in our same season, in our same age range, things like that, we, in some ways, kind of probably didn't recognize what was happening around us. And some of our friendships here, like some of our closest friends that we have, like, I don't even know how much younger they are. Definitely more than 10 years. I think,
probably,
yes.
Yeah.
I think I haven't figured out the math yet. They're definitely more than 10 years younger than us. And it doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't
like sometimes we'll make a reference about a TV show or something, and they're like, "Oh, let us show you." Like that happens, but other than that,
but it's so cool because. But now I feel like we're learning from each other in a really fun way. Where initially probably the relationship started one way, and now it's like a really deep, fun relationship that we look to each other for things if we need it, or all that kind of stuff. And the age doesn't really even matter anymore. So, and
it's funny because I remember we had shared this with some of our good friends in the States. We were having a chat with them, and we said, "Oh, like
best friends."
Yeah, exactly. So. Very close. They were one of the people standing there at the window, and we were sharing that with them, and they were like, "You guys do realize we're 10 years older than you?" And we were like, "Oh yeah." We forgot that. Like when we became friends with them, we didn't have children. They had children. As we started our family, their kids were like in high school, middle school. Like all the life stage was very different. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, like we had just forgotten the fact that they were older than us because it wasn't a thing anymore. Yeah. And so I think, but when you go into a new place, sometimes you forget that. Mm-hmm. Well, and you think, this is my, this is what it's supposed to look like.
Yeah, you assume that, okay, we're going to move to this new place, and it's only natural that our best friends or our new friends that we would start to make are going to be in the same life stage. But that's not
It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to
be that way at all.
No. So. And we do joke with like some of our friends who are younger that we often say things like, we come with baggage. We have children. There are things that are going to happen. Sometimes we'll schedule something and the kid gets sick and we can't, leave. Like there was a hilarious meme thing that was going around for a while that was like, when you have friends that have kids, like this is what comes with them, and it was like the fact that they'll cancel because their kid's sick, or like they can't leave their children alone because they die if they leave their kids alone, like at a certain age and stuff. I mean, it made me laugh so hard that I sent it on to our friends that we don't have kids, several of them, and said sorry. And then I also think there's something great if you're a couple to have other friends that are couples, but also don't discredit having single friends.
Yeah. We had shared about this a little bit.
Yeah, we've shared about that before. That was the case for us in the States, and it's the case for us here. And I think that was never for us anything that like held us back from friendships.
Yeah, definitely.
But like if you are a couple and you're moving to a new place, I mean, yes, there's different. Like, I mean, there are some people that I'm close with somebody and you're not necessarily, but then there are other people that we're both close with and that we are friends with and that kind of thing. So don't like discredit like if they're not married or that like that. You can throw that away because I think it's so important to have single friends and stuff part of your life. So that's another thing of like just age, life stage, season of life.
Don't put certain expectations in some ways on who's going to be your friends.
No, because then you cap it really.
Yeah, exactly.
And you don't realize those kind of things. I think that's super important. And then you just have to be open and vulnerable and be willing to, in some ways, in many ways, share your space. well, when
you technically can.
Yeah, let's ignore
in some ways.
Let's forget that in COVID times, there was a lot of times we could not share our space. It wasn't safe to do so. But in normal times, I'm sorry, not normal times, and whatever we're calling the times.
Well, I think being open and vulnerable with people, definitely, and I think for some people, having people in your home, like, that is a natural fit. And there might be some people that's just not how they build relationships. They might build their relationships in other ways. For us, our experience, it's been super helpful to invite people into our home.
Yeah.
And that in some ways, when we invite people into our home, that kind of shows some boundaries go down for the people that enter into our home. And that hopefully, in that, as we're building that relationship, it has created a vulnerability and an openness because we're inviting them into our safe space. I'm not saying you have to do that. That's just what we do. It's helpful,
though.
It is helpful.
And when we're invited into someone else's space too, I feel like, I understand them a bit differently.
Yeah, I think if you are, definitely. I think it is extremely helpful.
And I think the hang up for a lot of people in doing that and inviting people in is like, I don't have enough space. My house doesn't look how I want it to look.
Yeah.
I feel like no matter where you live, these things are the case. Like it's hard in London because our spaces are smaller. Sometimes it's hard to invite a family of 5 into your space and those kinds of things, or all of that comes into mind. And like, people just don't care. I think I get hung up so much of like, I will point out the thing when people walk into our house, like, oh, I'm so sorry, we didn't get a chance to clean this thing, or it's dusty, I haven't dusted in a couple weeks, or whatever it may be. And I actually shouldn't even have pointed that out because they were like, I don't notice that. Or your house is cleaner than mine, or whatever it may be. A friend in the States, I remember at one point, she told me she would know that we had crossed the threshold of our friendship into a deeper friendship when she could come over and still see the dog hair, because we had a golden retriever, so dog hair, lots of it. If she could still see the dog hair on the floor and knew I hadn't swept before she came over. And I was like, oh. And then I remember having a moment with one of our really good friends that he had sat on the floor and was playing with our daughter Veda. And when he stood up, there was dog hair all over his trousers. And I was like, pants, sorry, whatever translation we need to do there.
Yep.
And then I remember joking, like, I didn't know you were coming over. I didn't sweep. And he was like, you knew I was coming over. And I was like, I'm trying to joke here. Like, I just don't care. I'm sorry. Here's a rolly thing to get the dog hair off. Because it sometimes just gets to that point. So there is something that happens when you invite people into your space, but also something that happens when you are more vulnerable with people. It's the whole idea of like going first. Sometimes when you share something you're struggling with or have struggled with, and the other person is like, oh, me too, or something similar. Often when I had a conversation with another mom, and I said something about they are from another place besides here, and I was making the conversation of like how difficult I was finding things and stuff, and I just shared a story, and she was like, oh my gosh, and then went into this whole thing as well of the story she was having too. And if I hadn't done that, like, we wouldn't have even had that conversation, which actually ended up being really encouraging for me, and I hope it was encouraging for her to like say, yeah, I see you, I feel that too. But often sometimes we are like, oh, especially, I mean, I'm just gonna say it, from an American living in a culture, in a UK culture that tends to be more like you don't always let the vulnerability out as much.
Yeah, there's definitely exceptions.
There's exceptions, of course. There's always exceptions, but that tends to generally be a little bit like the Americans come in and they're the oversharers. Tends to be what our friends will joke with us about.
That keep calm, carry on thing is like
real,
legit.
It's like legit. It's keep calm, carry on. You don't need to share your troubles with others. And so for a while, I found myself falling into that, and then I realized, oh, this isn't me. This isn't actually who I am, and this is not helping me get deeper friendships. This is actually hindering them.
Yeah.
Of course, there's different levels. There is such a thing as oversharing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
For sure. We've been on the other end of that sometimes. I'm like, whoa.
One of our sons might have some.
Yeah,
he might have a tendency.
Yes,
for that
one of
as
our
well.
sons does. Like, and we're like, honey, I think just like start from the beginning, maybe not go all the way to the
Yeah.
like start there and start the conversation there. But I think we have both probably found ourselves in that, and then we thought this isn't helping grow friendship here. Like, I need
Well,
to be a
again,
little bit more.
it goes back to what we were saying with our oldest, and just how he was trying to fit in, and like he was, creating himself and being who he thought he should be. But when he actually changed and just was like okay with who he was and just being himself, that's when those relationships started to form.
Yeah.
Because those new relationships that were forming like actually saw him for who he was, where if we're going to be vulnerable and be us, if we are by nature as Americans more overshares, then like there's nothing wrong with that. Like obviously be mindful of that, but at the same time, if that's something that you do and that's who you are, like you shouldn't not do that.
You have to be yourself, because you're not really going to be good friends with somebody if they're getting like a false facade
exactly
of you.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the biggest thing.
And I think in that too, like, know that as friendships, usually when you think about like your close friendships that maybe you've had in the past or that you have now, you've usually either had to say some difficult things to one another at some point in that friendship. You've gone through hard things together, that kind of stuff. And I think often, sometimes when we hit those barriers with people, we think like, oh, well, this isn't worth it, or this is too difficult and stuff like that. But like, that's relationships. That's just real life. And that's actually usually what takes it to the next stage, if you will.
Yeah.
It does sound like dating, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
But it is so true to have, one of my good friends in the States, I remember at one point through a text and stuff, I hadn't heard back from her for a while, and I texted her and I was like, oh, is everything okay and stuff? And she was like, I need you to know, like, that your last text, I don't think you meant it to be that way, but it was really hurtful. And I had to take a minute and like read back, and I was like, oh, I see what she's saying. Like, and then we ended up having a conversation about it and all, like, but it literally took our friendship to the next level. Mm-hmm. Her calling me out on something like that, and realizing like our personality differences and how direct I was in something, and she didn't want it to be that direct, and that's just one example of things of, we've had some friends go through lots of life things, and like sometimes it means that like we don't have the answer for them, we can't fix it for them. But it's just sitting there with them. It's just being there. It's just showing up. Yeah. It's, there's almost the majority of the time, there's something that friends go through and you can't fix it for them. You can't make it better. But you can make it, when I say you can't make it better, you can make it better by the fact that they know that there's someone there. And so for us, that has looked of people have shown up at our door when they know we're going through something, or, our family, I'm going to knock on wood here. Our family like gets hit by the stomach flu sometimes, and it knocks all of us out at the same time. And I remember a couple of times we've had the stomach flu of people being like, oh, I don't want to go anywhere near you because I don't want it, but I've dropped some soup off at your front door. Don't come out till I've left the driveway. We've had so many things like that have happened, mm-hmm. that have taught us like it's sometimes is showing up. Sometimes showing up means you actually can't physically be with them too, but it's sometimes those. I remember our first Thanksgiving here. I was just feeling really down and stuff, and my friends. One of my friends sent this huge package of stuff from the States that was everything from like Thanksgiving decorations to some Thanksgiving food that could be shipped and stuff like that. And it just, made me feel so special and like seen and everything like that. Her picking up on the fact that it was going to be really difficult to have our first Thanksgiving in a country that doesn't celebrate it, Yeah. So often it can be like simple things like that you can do for others. Or that as someone does for you, you're like, oh, like this means, and it's so simple sometimes. Sometimes we just overcomplicate it. I think that we think it has to be this grand thing, and it doesn't have to be that way. And that's how relationships build, though. That's how, that's just, when I look at our friendships, that's how they built, is through some of those simple
showing
gestures.
Up, taking that first step.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Being open and authentic with people.
And it's hard, you guys. Like, we are 5 years into living here.
Yeah.
And wow, I can look and see like, and again, I think the other thing is too, sometimes you have rose-colored glasses that you look back and like, oh, we had all of our friendships were deep and stuff like that. And then when you really think about it, you're like, actually, you can only go deep with so many people.
Exactly.
And then you also have good friends that maybe aren't as deep, and that's not to discredit them, but you can only have like really good, deep relationships with so many people and maintain them because it takes spending time with them and things like that. That often sometimes we have to put ourselves in check and be like, oh yeah, we don't need like 45 people here. You know, and that kind of stuff, and really celebrating the ones that are in front of us and that we get to dive into deeper friendships with. And we're still in that, like I said, we're still in that process 5 years later. We're still building friendships. We're still, you know, realizing, oh my gosh, we have known some of these people for 5 years, and like, I really like them. They're really cool. We should spend more time with them. And that is still, I mean, when you move to a new place, it just takes time to figure that out.
Yeah.
And you're adjusting to a new place too. And so sometimes your bandwidth for friendships is different at different times too.
Right. Yeah, because you're just trying to manage the transition in a lot of ways. So.
Exactly. Yeah. So I hope this is encouraging and not discouraging. If you are in a new place or have moved to a new place or are about ready to, and you're maybe thinking through like how hard it's going to be to like leave people. And yeah, I mean, goodness, we left some friendships in the place that we were living before that I had for, oh my gosh, I'm really going to age myself thinking through this, like
for a couple decades
plus years.
Yeah, a couple decades.
And I remember, you know, that group of friends threw us like a going away party and stuff. And I just remember they did this like thing where they toasted us and stuff like that. I remember just crying and thinking like, how am I ever? And like, again, I'm never going to replace that because they're still very much in my life. And that is, I mean, when you have that many years of friendship with people, like,
it's
that
not
does
going away.
not go away.
It's not changing.
And so it's just something to like remember, of like celebrate and still honor all those friends that you have. But it's important to make friendships in the space that you're living too, because that's important as well. So just take it one step at a time. You may have to go first. And that's, you know, that's part of it.
Yeah, definitely.
But you can create friendships, and it's so good to have friendships where you're living as well. So
yeah, just being in a relationship and just how that can change the trajectory of just where you're at in many different ways, and just being able to have a place or a group of people or a couple of people or one person that you just really can feel like you're seen by that person it goes a long way.
We need each other. That sounds so cheesy, but we need one another, because we all go through stuff, and we need one another just to be there.
Yep,
often.
Definitely.
So, yes, we'd love to hear your feedback on anything you have found helpful if you've ever moved before,
definitely.
in building friendships. Because, like I said, there's no done date on any of this kind of thing. It's always a process, and so we'd love to hear your feedback. Send us a direct message on Instagram at Laurent Collective, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, and we can share some of those with everybody as well, and just encouragement for one another as we dive into creating new friendships and new places. Thanks for joining us on today's episode of the Laurent Collective podcast. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave a review, which helps others find our podcast. Continue the conversation with us over on Instagram at Laurent Collective.
We look forward to going deeper than just surface talk with you again next week.